Hi, this is Carl Rust, and I've worked in schools for over 30 years. I've learned a lot about how people learn, and I wrote a book called Get Out of the Way and Let Kids Learn, How We Can Transform Schools and Reintroduce Natural Learning. Hello everybody, Carl Rust here. Get Out of the Way and Let Kids Learn, episode 6 of the podcast. Welcome to everybody, I'm glad you're here. I hope you're having a lovely week. So I'd like to start off talking about something that's happened. And so on Saturday, I was volunteering at the local nature center. A couple young men came in to do community service. And I didn't ask what they were doing community service for, teenagers. But it was interesting spending the day from about 1 o'clock to 5 o'clock with these young men who were there, not really because they wanted to be there, I don't suppose. Although I think for that age range, the possibilities of community service are limited. So we spent the afternoon, and I gave them tasks to do, and I wasn't the one that originally set it up, so I didn't have a ton of things for them to do, but we went and picked up some trash from the premises. We went in the woods and picked up some trash. We cleaned up inside a little bit, did some sweeping and some Swiffering and stuff like that. And it was interesting because it seems in a way that was running against a lot of things that I talk about in this podcast. Different kind of situation. So we have people here, not really of their own free will, although they probably had a few choices of where to go. And wasn't my decision that they come. It wasn't really their decision, I don't think. It was kind of imposed on them. And it was hot. There were times they didn't want to go outside, and I said, "Oh, come on, we're going outside." And so I used a little coercion, but I always try to give options so that they could have decided just to shorten the time and go home. I wasn't keeping them prisoner. It was interesting because they were on their phones a lot, which is what young people tend to do these days. And when I asked them to do things like, we were in the woods and I was trying to make it a learning experience as much as possible. So I would point out, okay, this is a maple tree and this is a honeysuckle. So this is invasive. We're going to cut this out. And they liked the cutting part, but they wanted to cut too many things. So I tried to make it educational, pointing out to them what poison ivy looks like. And there was really a different kind of experience, I think, for them. I'm not sure that they spend a lot of time traipsing through the woods. But it was walking a fine line for me between what I believe and just what the situation called for. So that's what's been going on this week. Today, I'm going to talk about testing and grades. Chapter 6 of my book. Are testing and grades necessary to determine what children have learned and guide instruction? Like always, I start off with a little story. And so here goes the little story about how grades and testing can be confusing. Bert and Ethel are Danny's grandparents. They have taken care of him since he was a baby because of his mom's struggles with drug addiction. They are puzzling over his latest report card. He is in his first quarter of 4th grade. In 3rd grade, Danny loved his teacher and got straight A's, which delighted Bert and Ethel because Danny had always struggled at school. Now in 4th grade, he has 1 B, 2 C's, a D, and an F in reading. But Danny loves to read. It is the one thing he really likes that relates to school. He passed the state test with a very high score in reading. What happened? Did he suddenly become worse in reading? When Bert and Ethel contact the teacher, it turns out that Danny didn't complete one required book report, and turned one in late. She only recorded 6 grades in reading during the first quarter, so when she averaged in a 0 and a 50% for being late, his overall score went down to 59%. In spite of our best, so that's where grades don't always make a whole lot of sense. Here's a kid who loves to read, reads all the time, but he didn't do one assignment at all, and he turned one in late, and he had 6 grades. So that's ruined his reading grade. And that happens a lot. If you dig into why people get grades, you'll find that out. So even though we have our best interest of kids at heart, we want them to grow and learn. And all teachers, most teachers, there's a few bad teachers out there, but most teachers really want to do a good job. They really want kids to learn and grow. Despite this, though, we have some insecurities, and parents have this too. How do we know if they're learning? How will we know if they're growing? Will they learn all the bits of knowledge that they need for the future? How will we know if we need to intervene? Ivan Illitch, in his book Deschooling Society, I talked about that one last time, says, but personal growth is not a measurable entity. It is growth in disciplined dissidence, which cannot be measured against any rod or any curriculum, nor compared to someone else's achievement. You can't measure personal growth. It's a pretty common misconception that you can tell how a child is doing in school by looking at test results and or grades. But if you really dig into the numbers, you'll see they can be very deceptive and misleading. So grades. So here's the thing with grades. Teachers give assignments. Kids do them at all different levels. Sometimes they finish everything. One kid may finish everything neatly, and one other kid may not, may do half of it, maybe sloppy. Some kid over here may not do it at all. So the teacher has to figure out, well, how do I put a score on this? How do I put a number or letter grade on this? The kid that does everything neatly, completes everything, and seems to understand what the teacher wants gets an A. The kid that maybe does part of it, it depends on how much. You know, if you go by your 100% grading scale, you get down to 75% is a C, below 70 is a D, below 60% is an F. But let's talk about, let's say we're starting a new learning unit. So kids are learning about how to multiply and divide fractions. What would you expect younger learners to know at the beginning? Most of them are not going to know very much, right? If they just started it, they may not know very much about it at all. So they do assignments, they're practicing, they take little quizzes, they take tests, and they move on through the unit. At the end of the unit, we would expect more kids to understand multiplying, dividing fractions. So would it make sense to put more weight on the scores at the end of the unit? But that's not typically what people do with grades. They take the whole bunch, all of it, lump it all together, average it out. What if somebody really understands this really well at the beginning? They don't do any of the daily assignments, they don't do any homework, but they take the test at the end and get it 100% correct. What grade does that person deserve? In a lot of classes, they'd get an F because they didn't do any of the work leading up to the final assessment. Even if they got 100% on that final assessment, even if a teacher weights tests more than daily work, it's still almost an impossible barrier to overcome when they've got all those zeros. What if they don't even know how to multiply? They don't even really understand dividing whole numbers. How confusing is multiplying dividing fractions going to be? Some teachers even give extra credit for being on time, putting your name on your paper, bringing a box of Kleenexes. How does that merit extra credit? So grades can turn school into a game with winners and losers. If you complete all the work on time and do a good job feeding back material that was spoon-fed to you in the first place, you should get a decent grade. So if you're neat, you're tidy, you're organized, you're on time, and you're good at echoing back what the teacher taught, you probably get good grades. If for whatever reason you don't do all this, you'll get a bad grade. So grades have more to do with compliance to a set of procedures than to a person's ability to reason and solve problems. So there's schools that have worked on this, that have worked on grading. And some schools have even done away with grading because they don't think that it really measures anything. It doesn't really tell us much about what a kid knows and can do. Take my community service kids. If I was going to give them a grade on those how would I do that? We cleaned, we went in the woods and cut out some invasive plants, and we looked at some leaves. I mean, how do I grade that? So at Jefferson County Open School in Lakewood, Colorado, they do personal narratives and they do projects, and they don't really do grades. The other thing about grades, and this kind of applies to testing too, is I don't really know what's going on inside your mind. All I know is what you give me on a piece of paper, or if you're working on a computer, what the computer calculates. I may be being rebellious. I don't want to do the task, so I don't show you anything. I've seen many kids get an assignment and tink tink tink, they're going through and just marking, circling answers. They're not reading anything. They're not really they're not like doing a math problem over here on the side. They're just mark. And I've seen it happen with computers too, where they just pick an answer. I'm done. And they're not engaged in the process. So how is that a real look at what they know and can do? Standardized testing, oh man, it's been just taken over education. Standardized test results are just like worshipped. And in my point of view, they're basically worth less. They don't tell us a whole lot. So they give these big tests, and kids sit for hours, several days, for hours at a time, answering questions, reading, calculating. But what about kids that suffer from test anxiety and don't perform well? What if they didn't eat breakfast? Maybe they didn't even have a good meal the evening before. Maybe somebody yelled at them on the way out the door this morning. They're in a bad mood. And let's face it, some people are just not good at paper pencil type tasks, which even if you use a computer, it's still basically a paper pencil type of task. You read something, you answer some questions, or you look at a math problem and you answer. It's not really hands-on. So if you're a hands-on person, and if you're a verbal person, you may be able to explain to me how to multiply a fraction, and you may be able to show me how to multiply a fraction and tell me, but when it comes to doing it on paper, some people just aren't that good at it. And really in the world of work and just the everyday world, which is more important, which is more vital of a skill to have, to be able to do paper pencil or verbal and hands-on? I think in most businesses and industries, there's some exceptions, verbal and hands-on is going to be what is going to be valued and what is going to get you ahead in life. So Anya Kamenetz wrote a book called The Test: Why Our Schools Are Obsessed with Standardized Testing, but You Don't Have to Be. And I'll try to remember to put some of these titles of these books in the show notes. So she goes into a lot of detail. I mean, her whole book is about testing, standardized testing. What's wrong with it? And she gives basically 10 problems. 1, we're testing the wrong things. Again, there's certain things that lend themselves to being on a test and certain things that don't. And like I mentioned, hands-on, practical situations, it's hard to put those on a test. Number 2, tests waste time and money. They're expensive to give, and they're a waste of time. Number 3, they're making students hate school and turning parents into preppers. Number 4, they're making teachers hate teaching. Number 5, they penalize diversity. So your cultural background may determine a lot about how you do on a standardized test, because standardized means what? Who is it standardized to? Maybe white middle class or white upper class? Number 6, they cause teaching to the test. Well, that's a big problem, because whenever you say to a teacher, why don't you do this fun thing? Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? Well, that's not going to be on the test. We have to get them ready for the test. Number 7, high stakes tempt cheating. If I think I might lose my job because of test scores, I may be tempted to cheat. It's happened. Number 8, tests are gamed by states until they become meaningless. So every state wants to be the leader. They want to be the best. Number 9, they're full of errors. And number 10, the next generation of tests will make things even worse. So if you want more details on any of that, Anya Kamenetz, Kamenetz, The Test: Why Our Schools Are Obsessed with Standardized Testing, but You Don't Have to Be. I like that title. Is it really necessary to constantly check on a person's progress? What if we decide everybody's a unique genius and they know what they're doing? What if we trust them? What will it take for us to relax and allow a person to come into their own set of skills naturally in their own time? Larry Cuban, pretty famous guy, writes in the book School, the Story of Public Education, the scanty evidence available on whether standardized test scores are connected to job performance suggests that they are not linked. Another book, The Myths of Standardized Tests, Why They Don't Tell You What You Think They Do. Authors Phillip Harris, Bruce M. Smith, and Joan Harris, Roman. Quote, a Leonard Baird study from 1985. It basically says the most effective way of predicting future accomplishments are past accomplishments in the same field or area at a lower level. So the best predictor of being good at math in the future is being good at math at a lower level. Studies reviewed show the best predictors of future high-level real-life accomplishment in writing, science, art, music, and leadership are similar accomplishments at a lower level in previous years. Past behavior is the most effective predictor of future behavior. So again, the flip side of that is the best predictor of scoring high on tests, on standardized tests, is past scoring high on standardized tests. In the program that I ran for a couple years, we did away with grades. We didn't have any grades, and we didn't really have any complaints. We did have to do standardized testing, and our results were just as good as anybody else's, even though we didn't do any formal instruction at all. Our standardized test scores were, the kids were growing, and they were beating the average. The problem with standardized tests, again, are they're limited to artificial problems that have to be solved in a particular way. They're looking for one right answer. Although, of course, how you get there may be some flexibility, but maybe not a lot. Have you ever read one? Have you ever looked at standardized test questions? When was the last time you had to take one? There's samples online if you want to look it up and see what it's like. You can find out. But testing is a multi-billion dollar industry. And testing corporations make a lot of profits from the testing. So the question is, why do we want to keep questions secret? One of the things you would find if you work at a school is they have these meetings and they get very serious about can't share, no cell phones allowed in the room, don't take any pictures. You're not even allowed to talk about, if I happen to be looking over a kid's shoulder while they're taking a test and I see a question, I'm not supposed to even talk about that. Why is that? If we really want real life situations, wouldn't we tell people the questions ahead of time? That way they can do research, they can look things up, they kind of know what to expect. The reason that we don't let any of those questions out is because they're owned by corporations and they don't want anyone to know what's in a test. Partly because a lot of the test questions are ridiculous, and if people knew that, they might say, why are we doing this? But the other reason, just proprietary, it's just somebody's property. They don't want other testing companies to know what it is, and they don't want anybody to really be able to prepare for these tests. I think at the very least, state legislators and State Department of Education people who are making us do this should have to take the test. Probably they should take the, it depends on your state. Some states go up to 8th or 9th grade and then they start doing something else. Some states go farther than that. But whatever the highest level is, I think every state legislator should take it. And let's make those scores public. How do they do on that test? But like I said, you can find some samples online. There's a website called Fair Test. It's the website for the National Center for Fair and Open Testing. Lists some principles which guide their work. Assessments should be fair and valid. They should provide equal opportunity to measure what students know and can do without bias against individuals on the basis of race, ethnicity, gender, income level, learning style, disability, or limited English proficiency status. Assessments should be open. The public should have greater access to tests and testing data, including evidence of validity and reliability. Where assessments have significant consequences, tests and test results should be open to parents, educators, and students. Tests should be used appropriately. Safeguards must be established to ensure that standardized test scores are not the sole criterion by which major educational decisions are made, and that curricula are not driven by standardized testing. Evaluation of students in schools should consist of multiple types of assessment conducted over time. No one measure can or should define a person's knowledge, worth, or academic achievement, nor can it provide for an adequate evaluation of an institution. I think testing is one way to evaluate, but how about happiness? How about attendance levels? Those seem more valid to me. Do you like your school? Do you want to be here? Alternative assessments should be used. So some people do well at paper pencil type tests, others need something different. So testing and grades should not be the God of education. We should not be worshiping those things. I think we'd be better off to get rid of grades. I'd like to get rid of testing, but if we're going to continue to do it, let's make it as small an imprint on the year of a kid and teacher as we can. So here's my suggestions. Don't teach to the test. It's been shown that students do worse on assessments when they are stressed out. Overemphasis on tests may actually be counterproductive. Wouldn't it be weird if your test results actually went up when you stopped worrying about them so much? Kids are happy and healthy, they'll do better on tests. Number 2, if you have to give tests, limit the number and the length. Does a kid really have to do 100 problems, or can they do 5 problems? Can they do 2 problems? What amount of does you need to see if somebody knows something? Do you need hours and hours and hours, or 5 minutes? Sometimes I think a 5-minute conversation tells you more than hours and hours of testing. Number 3, suggestion. Parents may consider withdrawing students during testing windows or asking that their children not participate in the test. Laws vary by state, so check into possible consequences. In Indiana, the consequence is more on the school than on the parent. And then I added something because when I wrote the book, I wasn't thinking about my suggestions, I wasn't thinking about grades. So parents can also say, we don't care about grades. If you have to give our kid a grade, we're not going to pay any attention to it. We don't need a report card. We trust our learner to be doing the things that they need to do to get ready for their future. And just tell your kids, hey, grades are not meaningful. We don't care about them. Tests are not meaningful. We don't care about them. We want healthy, happy kids. So like I said last time, hopefully you will give me some feedback and let me know what you think about this. Standardized tests and grades and just general school stuff in general. So my book, Get Out of the Way and Let Kids Learn, How We Can Transform Schools and Reintroduce Natural Learning, is on Amazon, Better World Books, lots of places. Let me know what you think of it. Give it to your buy a couple copies and give some to teachers. Let me know if you think I'm crazy and full of hot air. That's fine. Actually, at some point, I'm going to be asking people to come on as guests, and I think it would be really interesting to find somebody that just thinks I'm nuts and doesn't agree with anything that I say. That would be an interesting podcast, maybe. Maybe they would convince me or I would convince them. I don't know. All right. Liberated Ed podcasts. It was a great one. I've been listening to that a lot. There are a lot of great podcasts out there, so find something you're interested in and keep learning and growing. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you next week. We'll talk about, does coercion and compliance lead to good citizenship and a happy life? So do we need to force people to do things they don't want to do? That'll be next time. Until then, I hope you are happy, healthy, and well. This has been Get Out of the Way and Let Kids Learn podcast. If you liked it, please subscribe, follow, share, and leave a comment.